My Lord and my God, I firmly believe that you are here, that you see me, that you hear me. I adore you with profound reverence. I ask you for pardon of my sins and grace to make this time of prayer fruitful. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me. Well, when I was younger, there was a pop song with the line, "If looks could kill, they probably will." And thinking about it, there's a lot of wisdom in that line. And in some way, it is the theme of today's gospel. It is what Jesus is speaking to us about in the gospel. The gospel begins with one of these tough lines from Jesus, we might call it. It appears maybe harsh, where Jesus says to his disciples, and that includes you and me, "If your virtue goes no deeper than that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven." And that kind of line kind of leaves us a little bit shocked. Lord, those are very tough lines. If our virtue goes no deeper than that of the scribes and Pharisees. Remember, the scribes and the Pharisees were very scrupulous men. They really did their very, very best to do everything that the law of Moses commanded them to do. So if there were taxes to be paid, no matter how small, they would pay them. If there was some fasting to be done, you could be sure they would never miss that fasting. Or if they had to be in Jerusalem for one of the feasts, you could be sure they'd be there before anybody else. If you had to avoid the Gentiles, they would avoid the Gentiles more than anybody else. So they look externally much more virtuous than anybody else. And certainly they themselves think that they are much more virtuous than anybody else. But in these tough lines of yours, Lord, you suggest they're not really on the road to heaven. Remember, if your virtue goes no deeper than that of the scribes and Pharisees, you will never get into the kingdom of heaven. What has happened? What has happened here is that the Pharisees and scribes have fallen into a deadly kind of spiritual sickness. And the scary part for us is that it's not restricted just to scribes and Pharisees. They're not the only ones who could ever fall into this kind of illness. You and I could quite easily fall into this sickness. And maybe even, in part, we already do suffer a little bit from this sickness. And we could call it, to coin a term, maybe externalism, where what really matters are the externals. That's what we think, that this is all that matters, that God is only interested in the externals, in the external behavior. Certainly, we're kind of very conscious of what other people think about us, what they see, and so that's a big part of it. So, in the same way as the scribes and Pharisees look after all these really external things, taxes, fasting, feasting, Gentiles, keeping commandments, not killing anybody. All these things are highly visible. They're on the surface. And so I'm sure any scribe or Pharisee you'd meet in any given day in Israel, they could say to you, "Well, I haven't killed anybody," and they'd be dead right, because that would be against the law. They certainly haven't killed anybody. And not only that, but they paid all their taxes and done all their fasting and all these other things. However, this is where looks could kill, and probably will. Because what Jesus says is that, in a way, they have killed people. And maybe lots of them. And also, again, because we're not limiting this to the poor scribes and Pharisees, maybe you have killed somebody. Maybe I have killed somebody. Today, maybe this very morning, I've killed somebody. I've killed somebody over the breakfast table with my looks, because looks, if they could kill, they probably will. So this is what Jesus says in the gospel. You have learned how it was said to our ancestors, "You must not kill." And if anyone does kill, he must answer for it before the court. But I say this to you, anyone who is angry with his brother will answer for it before the court. If a man calls his brother fool, he will answer for it before the Sanhedrin. And if a man calls him renegade, he will answer for it in hellfire. So interesting, what we see here in these three things that Jesus says, the punishment is getting progressively more serious. The person who says in his heart, who's angry in his heart really, he has to go to court. There's a kind of repercussion. If he then insults the person with fool, then he's before the Sanhedrin, which is more serious. And then if he calls him renegade, which probably is more serious than just fool, well then hellfire. So our Lord, what he's showing is that the external manifestations in these cases, they're really minimal. Just in our heart, nobody sees it. There's no external, there can be no external manifestations of our anger. It's all happening on the inside. Maybe just my thoughts, my boiling up thoughts, but nobody sees. I may have a big smile on my face, but inside I'm really angry. And our Lord already says, well, court. And then there might be a little minimal manifestation. You fool. A bit of an insult. And Jesus says, Sanhedrin. And then, well, more harsh, the renegade. And our Lord says, hellfire. In each case, our Lord is pointing to the same thing. Our Lord is saying, look, the external part of it is not really the question. The internal part is the question. Think about it, how often Jesus, we see you speaking about the heart. What's happening in your heart? Where your heart is, there your treasure is. Nobody else sees it. God sees it. Everything on the surface might be sugar and spice and all things nice, but inside it might be a very different story of anger and hatred. And so you, Jesus, are inviting us to go to the root of our actions, the heart, the very source of things long before they manifest themselves. St. Thomas Aquinas, he's got a really interesting line. Sure, all his lines are interesting, but this one I find really quite striking. He says, in commenting actually it's partly a comment on this, he says, Christ wills that we beware not only of murder, but also of anger. And thus he wills us to abstain from the beginnings of sin, and so from anger, which is the beginning of murder. Really an amazing little phrase, the beginning of murder. So we're this anger with somebody. There can be a good anger where we're angry for their sake and so on, like a parent, a father, a mother might be angry with their child because they're endangering their health or whatever. And that's a good anger. This is a bad anger. I hate this person. Look, there they go again, stupid fool. This kind of anger that unfortunately we won't experience. And St. Thomas says this is the beginning of murder. If looks could kill, this is where it kind of begins. And so, even St. Augustine tells us, he says, God judges not only the deeds, but the dispositions from whence the deeds proceed. And where they come from. Let's go back to the very source, the very start of all these things, the heart. Let's not be superficial, which is also the same as being minimalist. You know what, again, people say, oh, well, haven't killed anybody. How often we priests have heard that in confession? Well, Father, haven't killed anybody. Okay. But where's your heart? We shouldn't be happy just because we haven't killed anybody. Have I insulted them? Have I thought evil of them? Have I killed them in my heart? Because that is what our Lord is saying. Maybe, no external killings, but we may have bodies strewn around us of people we've killed in our heart. So going back to that song, if looks could kill, they probably will. What begins with thoughts turns into looks, and then words, and then we're not far from killing. Let's ask Our Lady to help us to heal our hearts, to start there, to start with the healing of our hearts. I give you thanks, my God, for the good resolutions, affections, and inspirations you have communicated to me in this meditation. I ask you for help to put them into effect. My Mother Immaculate, Saint Joseph, my Father and Lord, my guardian angel, intercede for me.